Welcome Yamhill County to Speaking Frankly. I'm your host, Howie Harkema, and our tagline is, "And how we doing?" Today, my guest is Democratic candidate for Senate seat in the District 12 race, Ross Swartzendruber. Swartzendruber, that's a great name.
Hey, glad to be here,
Nice
Howie.
to have you,
Thanks,
Ross.
thanks for inviting me.
Welcome to Speaking Frankly. So Ross, what inspired you to run for District 12 Senate seat?
Well, I've lived in the district my whole life, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that we need to address inequality. There's a lot of things that are happening that we don't have a voice in anymore, and things like affordable housing, health care, and especially education. So that's the reason I'm running, is because of the inequality.
Boy, that's a real important factor, that you're inspired to do the work by other people. So what is your background here in Oregon?
Well, I was born and raised here. I was born in McMinnville and raised in rural Polk County, south of Amity, on a sheep farm. And basically, we were working poor, and we got a place and made a family business and grew the sheep farm to let us enter the middle class. So I've kind of seen how that transforms everyone's lives that's involved with it. You work hard, you make the right decisions, you do take some risks, but there's success at the end, and you can always see yourself, see the growth happening. And
you're a fifth generation Oregonian.
Yes, family's been in here since about 1870s, 1880s. There's a failed Amish colony here in Whiteson, which is south of McMinnville. I don't know if you know of Hook and Eye Road, but
I've seen the
yeah,
name.
that's where it was kind of associated. And my grandmother was born a couple generations into it. So we grew up Mennonite, and I attended the Sheridan Mennonite Church for 20 years. It's a conservative Mennonite church. They don't believe in television. They do believe in cars. And I think that's kind of the dividing line between the Amish and the Mennonites, or the cars.
What about technology? Do they?
Oh yeah, well, we ended up getting asked to leave because of television. So
is that right?
Yeah, they don't really like television.
Well, some of it you can understand why.
Totally.
So, are you a progressive Democrat?
Yeah, I'd like to consider myself a progressive Democrat. I think there are a lot of things that are being called progressive now that I'm not sure are progressive.
Right.
So it's really kind of difficult to latch on to a definition at this point. I really want to see more community benefits for the policy that we create. Right now, I think too much money is going out of the community.
Yes.
So I think if that makes me a progressive of wanting people to, enrich their own lives locally and the community, then yeah, definitely I'm a progressive.
So you consider yourself a Bernie-crat. What does that mean?
Oh, Bernie-crat. We always like, Bernie Sanders did a great job, I think, of bringing that message of inequality out. So everybody says, yes, that's true. We're not getting equal treatment as allowed by our Constitution that we're all, chosen to live under. So we need to find ways to, assert ourselves to regain some of that equality that we've had in the past, especially as middle-class people. Income discrimination is really, I think, the hot topic right now, and I think everything should be focused toward that. As a working poor growing up, I was discriminated against many, many times, and I really didn't even know it at the time. But since I've looked around, especially this campaign, I bumped into Jim Hill. He's the state treasurer. He was the first African-American statewide office elected back in the 90s. And he just came out with this new book. It's called The New N-Word is the White Middle Class. And reading through that, and listen to his experiences of living under a system where there were actually two different laws for citizens, and how he overcame that, and had came up to be an elected official in Oregon. It's really interesting to see those parallels and to draw from that to form action, I think.
How do we address the inequality when there seems to be such a push for mainstream candidates?
Well, I guess that's the whole thing. Until the voters say we've had enough, and they don't just if somebody says, yeah, I don't support campaign limits, then you just vote no on those people.
Right.
You just have to vote no. You have to wake up and say, look, if somebody's been here 10 years or 20 years, are they in touch with reality anymore?
Right.
I guess that's my main concern. Is I see all this policy it's not based in reality. It's not based on
what
facts.
the people are asking for.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even, it's not community based, but it's not fact based.
Right.
And that's the problem I have. I was studied in college to be a biologist. I worked in biotechnology.
Right.
So I understand, the need for empirical evidence for basing policy on.
Mm-hmm.
And when there is none of that, then you're just going on, raw emotion. And while I think emotion is important, it should be based on fact.
You're running against an incumbent. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, well, as most people know, incumbents win 9 out of 10 races.
Right.
So unless there's something, a shift, that's never going to change. And that's why I ran 4 years ago in House District 23,
Right.
which is the south half of Senate District 12. And I kind of, just to see what it was all about, I really wanted to try to help improve the community. And then 4 years later, I see that really a lot, if anything has changed, it's gotten worse. And that especially came up with the education. About the time that the filings were due last year, or at the beginning of this year, I was confronted with some issues at my daughter's school.
Mm-hmm.
She goes to Straub Middle School in Salem Kaiser School District. And she brought home a syllabus that said that D was 27%. So all she would have to do to get a D in her class in Spanish in 7th grade was get 27% of the coursework and the tests.
Goodness.
And I thought, well, that's really setting up for grade inflation and quite a few other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to the parent club, and none of the fellow parents that knew anything about this.
Really?
And I talked to my principal, and she basically said, well, the 70% D, that's the old way, and the 27% D is the new way. Okay. And I said, well, are high schools accepting that? It's like, well, no. Well, what about universities? Do they accept that new system? And they go, well, no, but they will. And that really kind of got me going,
mm-hmm.
saying that there's really no choice locally
mm-hmm.
to address this. I think it's a crisis in education.
Well, it seems also like maybe a lack of communication from the school district's point of view to the parents.
Well, I think, of course, there's lack of notification. That's just skimming the surface
mm-hmm.
of what the school districts are doing without communicating with the parents. And basically, they're just going to keep doing it until parents say, hey, whoa, what are you doing? Where are the results? Where are the outcomes? We want outcomes, and we want accountability.
Right.
So until that happens, they're going to keep doing exactly what they're doing.
So what do you see as the key issues in District 12 and throughout Oregon?
Well, like I say, inequality is the number one issue. The working class and the middle class are definitely being disadvantaged.
Yes.
And they're shrinking. If you look at Canada's middle class, it's growing. Now they're the number one middle class in the world.
Wow.
And I take a look at the U.S., who's supposed to be number one in everything.
Right.
And now we're number two in the middle class. And you can see it because of all the decisions that are being made, all the money that's being spent that's going straight out of the community.
Well, exporting all of our jobs
Right.
is a huge key to all of that as well.
Right. I know that's a little federal policy. There's not a lot we can do about it.
I realize that.
But we certainly can talk about it and discuss it. See, that's a lot of things nobody's discussing any of this stuff. And I really have a problem with that. And especially when I go to the school board and say, hey, what's with this 27% D? And they're saying, well, there's nothing we can do. And then I go to the legislators and I say, what's with all these federal rules? And well, there's nothing we can do. And I'm going, well, no, school districts were formed prior to the state here in Oregon.
Right.
And my school that I graduated from, Amity, that's a very interesting story, and it's all about education and people putting their differences aside for the benefit of their community. If you look back in 1848, they said, all right, it's time to get a school, and basically they were ready to put one together. Nobody could decide what they wanted to do or where they wanted to put it. And there were partisan politics, so of course one group wanted it at one end of town, and the other group wanted it at the other end of town.
Mm-hmm.
And then the gold rush came, and everybody wanted to take off and sell picks and shovels to the miners. And one guy, his name is Ohio Watt, said, look, I'll teach you kids, I won't go down to the gold fields, and I'll teach you kids if you do right now build a school.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to build a school or I'm out of here. And so they said, okay, yeah, we'll do that. But we're going to build it down here, and we're going to build it down here. And they had their wagons loaded up with lumber, both for two different schools. And the guy said, no, you guys meet halfway, build a school there, and then that's where I'm going to teach. And that's what happened. And that's why they named the town Amity, which they say is friendship, but I would say it's more not being enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And so they put aside their differences and founded the town on education. If you look at a lot of towns in the Willamette Valley, they're founded the same way.
Sure.
Jefferson, Dallas, McMinnville, interestingly enough, was founded on just straight commerce.
Mm.
So, and you can see the difference, I think, in the development of all these different communities.
Sure.
I mean, Mac has always put commerce number one, and look at the rewards of focusing on that.
Well, as a taxpayer,
Mm-hmm.
I expect our children to come out of high school with an education.
Right.
But that's no longer the case so often.
Right. And I guess, and trying to address that and trying to find answers for that is almost impossible. So the one issue I have is with the high stakes annual testing, the SBAC, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. And basically that's a product provided by McGraw-Hill and delivered by AIM to the school, and they cost $10 million statewide a year now for these tests. And this is the second year they've done this rigorous of testing, and we have the results from that. And they always been saying, okay, we want accountability, we want this rigor, and then we want outcomes. That's what I hear from just about everybody is, where are the educational outcomes? So now we spent all this money, and it's not just the $10 million on the tests themselves. It is classroom time that is put toward the testing.
Sure.
It's also the computer lab time that's lost. So we have all this expensive equipment sitting in that school. Then nobody can use them because they're being used for testing. And that's for about three to 4 weeks out of the year. It's really not productive. And I went ahead and crunched the numbers on McMinnville School District.
Awesome.
For the 2014-15 and 2015-16 numbers. And they don't make it easy for you to do comparisons on these. Okay, this is their answer to accountability is producing a report. And that's it. That's the extent of the accountability. It's up to us to look at it and say, is this working or not?
Right.
Now, one of the main goals of the high stakes testing and Common Core is to narrow the achievement gap. Now, what that means is for disadvantaged groups, for non-Northern European groups that go to school, they should be getting closer to what the Northern European groups are scoring. And based on this, it's not looking very good. So I just pulled out the Hispanic math and English scores. And they have a 4-point system. Okay, and I told you earlier about the D being in 27.
Right.
And by the way, my daughter brought home the science syllabus for 8th grade science. It's now 20% for a D.
Okay.
So, I'm looking at that and saying, okay, 7% lost every year. That means 3 years, nobody's going to fail.
That's correct.
We've accomplished our goal, right?
Right. I get it.
Okay, I have a problem with that. So the 4-point scoring, it's 1, it's like you're barely showing up for school. 2, you're kind of paying attention. 3, it would be a C, and a 4
Average.
would be you're mastered it or you're proficient. So 1s and 2s overall for the Hispanics, for every Hispanic student in McMinnville School District, 63% failed, got a 1 and a 2.
Wow.
And overall, that's of everybody, 50% failed. So right there is 13%.
Sure.
Okay, and we're talking 1,218 were designated as Hispanic out of 3,398. So about 35% of the school district is getting 13%, higher fail rate
In the Latino
overall
community.
in the Latino community. Okay, and if you go down, the high school is 75% to the all total of 60%. It's consistently 13 to 15% on every step, and that's for math. English is a little better, but now in math, there's a problem with McMinnville School District because they fell below the 95% participation rate that is mandated by the federal government. They came in at 94.3. Now normally the U.S. Department of Education has threatened every state that they're going to pull their funding if they get below that 95.
I've heard this many times.
Exactly. And we all know that it's baloney because New York State's been under for 3 years now, and they never pulled the New York's funding.
Right. How could they?
Right, exactly. And I guess that's what I'm saying. In order for us to be, participate in democracy, we're reduced to moving these little numbers, tenths of a percent.
Sure.
To say, all right, we're protesting this by getting less than 95% of our kids taking a test that we're paying $10 million for.
So how does it incentivize the state when they hear a threat of the funding possibly being pulled, and yet they can't change the numbers?
Right. That's the issue. But the bigger issue is these standardized tests are actually designed to, widen the achievement gap. They're based on eugenics movement theories that standardized testing will help divide and segregate different populations. But that's exactly what's happening.
America is trying to bring itself back together, and this is the wrong direction.
It's way, way wrong direction. But that's just education.
Right. So to move on, because we've got 10 minutes left, let's talk about land use laws for a moment.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about land use. I've lived out, we've had property out in the country since the land use laws went into effect, 73. And the one thing I've noticed, especially in the last 15 years, is all my neighbors are leaving. And, I looked at the report in Washington County they're doing on rural tourism, and they said between 2002, 2012, Washington County alone lost 200 farms that were 10 to 50 acres. Okay, so these are hobby farms. You really can't make a living on anything less than 100 acres for a family.
Got it.
But at the same time, the only growth sector is 1,000 plus acres. So we're making these mega farms. That's the only thing the financing is, creating.
Okay.
And this land use, I would like to see us kind of see if the consequences from the land use laws are exactly what we want to have happening. Now, the rural poor are really disadvantaged, and you can see that in these test scores too. The way the spending is going in rural Oregon, these towns are going to dry up within a generation.
And the mom and pop farms are going to go away, and the corporate farms are just going to be huge.
Right, and the corporate farms are going to have less diversity, less diversity of farming practices, on down the list. If that's the way it's happening, is that the way people want it to happen? And we, as a society and community, can decide that.
Right.
But I don't hear anybody talking about it.
Okay.
And a lot of people I talk to out in the country feel like the urban centers are treating us like a Disneyland.
Okay.
Where you make all these rules, you put up these fences, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't
Right.
do this, and all they do is drive through and say, "Wow, man, this is great. This looks great. Man, let's go have some wine. Let's enjoy the rural scene." When we're paying for it out there,
Right.
and it's going to reach a crisis point, I think also.
Let's talk about local markets and how we can bring those back to bear.
Well, yeah, I'd like to talk about a nonprofit that I started in Salem. It's called the Salem Creative Network. And we're basically providing creative solutions through social innovation. So basically we look at a challenge in the community and then find people who may have some interest in solving that challenge.
Yes.
And then see what they can do. And then create programming to try to illustrate the directions we should go. We're really successful in quite a few different efforts. The first one that we really had success with was the Solarized Salem program. Basically, it's a bulk purchasing program of solar panels for residential homes. And we ended up doing about 150 kilowatt, 60 homes in the Salem area and in the Mid-Valley. And there was a brand new market. It was like $1 million in solar in 1 year in Salem.
Wow.
And everybody was like, "How is this happening?" And it's like, well, because their demand is there.
Right.
And no one's servicing that demand because it's too difficult to figure out and put all the pieces together with, is it good for my home? Is it going to have the payback? What are the incentives? How do I get educated about it? So we provided, programming to do that. And then we grew it to a commercial program also with large manufacturers and large construction companies, and ended up doing solar on a few schools in Salem also. I learned quite a bit.
I bet you did.
Yeah. And another way we address Salem specifically is the downtown. Now, you guys here in Mac are pretty lucky.
Yes, we are.
And I know, and that did not happen overnight.
No, it did not.
I've been coming here since I was a little kid.
Yep.
When we lived west of the Eolas by Bethel, McMinnville was the center of the universe.
Yeah.
Nobody
seat,
wanted
yeah.
nobody wanted to go to Salem. It was between McMinnville and Dallas for me. So, I cruised the gut, and I was, a little, not a townie in coming to here. Everybody loved to come to town, Turkey Rama.
Sure, all of it.
All the time. But it wasn't really until the 2000s when McMinimans came in when this downtown really started working together.
They took notice.
Yes. And look what's happened.
Yes.
And it's not all determined by the normal regular forces that are doing it, like the UFO festival.
Right.
I mean, if you look at that thing,
The exponential growth has
Yes.
been unbelievable.
and no one would have dreamed that many people would be coming to
That's
McMinnville.
correct.
And I think McMinnville has now established itself as this quirky town that people can express themselves a little bit differently at.
Yes.
And in addition to all the regular programming that's been going on for decades, things like the Cruise the Gut Festival,
Yep.
I really think those and the UFO Festival are really identifying a transition in cultural programming.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized, it didn't take. There's still people having arguments about how to do it right.
Yeah.
But in Salem, it was a different situation.
Huge town.
Right, there's a lot larger downtown. You have pretty much just 3rd Street here, but it does have the inventory for historic buildings.
Yep.
It has the hospitality facilities. It has all the pieces to surpass everything, and it used to
Yes,
back
it
in the
did.
60s and the
It
70s.
certainly did.
If you want to go fine dining, you would go into Salem.
Yep.
So how do we get back to that spot? Or actually, what caused it to die out?
Right.
And a lot of spelunking and policy and meeting with politicians and counselors and businessmen came up with a little plan to kind of activate public space.
Sure.
And I think that's really what it comes down to, is finding ways to get the community to come together
Yes.
and discuss things and see culture, experience culture. We started the Cherry City Music Festival.
Right.
This year, it's been 10 years that we've done a festival
Right.
in Salem. And it's just amazing to see how it's grown and how how many venues are still with it, because we have it in multiple venues. You'll see 12 or 13 venues, and how many of the same bands are still around.
Sure.
And it's just fascinating to see, you know, the ups and downs, what makes a business come, what makes it go. And another project we started was the pop-up art gallery. And basically, we went to the Salem Center Mall and said, hey, you got an empty storefront. We'll keep the lights on and try to get you a new tenant if you let us use it at a discounted rate.
Right, for artwork.
For artwork and artists and programming. And within 3 months, they had a new tenant in the first one. They gave us the old Borders books, which is 3 times the space. It took us about 4 months to get a new tenant for that. So 2 tenants already. And then we went to the Liberty Parkade, which is a city-owned property. Nothing had been in that space for 5 years. And we did a nice graffiti mural on the inside and really had some hip-hop programming,
Yep.
some breakdancing. Within 4 months, the city subdivided that into 2 units and leased both of them out. And that's the type of growth that I think I would like to encourage in every town in the district. And I know how to do it. I'm really experienced in doing it. And you know, the landlords love it.
I'm sure they do.
The artists love it. It's a win-win. It's just you have to be able to get around certain barriers.
Right.
And that's the whole thing. I always bump up to these state-level barriers that are keeping new markets from developing.
Right.
And it's identified, and it's nurtured, and then there's the barriers.
Right.
So I think I'm really capable of identifying those barriers and removing them or going around them.
That sounds awesome. So we've got about 2 minutes left here. Do you need additional volunteers to canvass for your campaign?
Yes, I would love to have anyone who wants to see something culturally develop in McMinnville and around here really should come out and help. I've been endorsed by Senator Jeff Merkley.
Right.
And the one I'm really proud of is the Oregon Cultural Advocacy Coalition.
Right.
And they're associated with the Cultural Trust. And I really want to have people identify heritage and maintain it and talk about it.
Sure.
Do those historic tours. We want to have artists taken care of and to support network. And also, small businesses.
Right. So you have a candidates forum coming up at Linfield. Would
Yes.
you like to speak about
Sure.
that quickly?
My opponent, Brian Bokos, and I will be together for a candidate forum Sunday, October 16th at 2 p.m., Riley Hall, or room 201 at Linfield. And I'll be having some of what I'm calling the political reimaginarium. We have some a solar-powered refrigerator and some solar-powered farm equipment, and we'll be talking about tiny homes.
That's
It's just
fantastic.
things that people can look at and see and say, hey, we can change. We can change the way we develop.
Right, and now they've got solar panels that aren't even panels. They're just plastic strips
Right.
that you can use. And I know that with that, you can sell back the additional wattage that you're not using to the power companies, too.
Well, yeah, I'd like to improve that situation too. There's a much better way to go. I've seen whole towns that are run on renewable energy and they sell their excess power and it benefits the community.
Right.
That's what I'd like to do in every rural town in
Well,
Oregon.
renewable energy is super important for our future. So thank you so much, Ross, for being on Speaking
All right.
Frankly. And folks, go to the Candidates Forum at Linfield College on the 16th. And what time is it again?
2 p.m.
2 p.m., Riley Hall. And witness what's going on in our community as far as District 12 Senate race. And thank you so much for watching today.
All right, thank you, and sign up at Friends of Ross.
There you go. you.